Hi, everyone. Welcome to the January 14th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look back at some stakes racing to begin. Gulfstream Park with a couple of turf stakes. They ran the Grade 3 Tropical Turf and the Marshuas River down there. We'll also look at the La Cañada Stakes from Santa Anita, as well as some other stakes racing from Southern California. We'll go to Aqueduct for a couple of state-bred stakes races, and we'll also pepper in some talk of some recent maiden and allowance winners, particularly ones down in Florida at Aqueduct and a couple from the fairgrounds, because I think we saw some impressive up-and-coming horses this past weekend that are in some pretty respectable speed figures. And Craig, I know this is a time of year when the stakes racing is a little bit light, but the excitement for me really comes from some of these maiden and allowance winners that we see distinguish themselves.
Yeah, I agree. It's that time of year where every 3-year-old maiden race and allowance race at Gulfstream. And like you said, even places like Aqueduct with the purses they offer these days and fairgrounds, there's some good barns there. Oaklawn will be opening soon. We'll see the same thing there. And of course, Santa Anita. So there's a good chance at this time. We've seen it before where maybe the Kentucky Derby winner's still a maiden at this point. So we'll definitely see some of these horses show up on the Triple Crown Trail. So it's always fun to talk about it as a guy. As much as I love the Kentucky Derby, I probably like betting all the preps along the way a little bit more.
I totally agree with that. And coming off last year, we saw a couple of likely 2-year-old champions that didn't run particularly fast in their major wins. So I think we're all looking for some horses that can achieve some faster speed figures. And a lot of them are going to be coming out of the maiden and allowance races. So it's worth following those performances. But let's begin with the graded stakes action at Gulfstream Park. We'll start with that Tropical Turf Stakes, Grade 3 event that went a mile on the turf on Saturday. And a little bit of an upset as Tusk, who had really been more of a claiming type for the majority of his career, just seems like he's really hit his stride now. He first got good for Jorge Navarro over the summer. He's continued improving for Saffie Joseph now and just ran his career best race to get the job done here.
He did. He got a 119 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, which I think was his best by more than a couple points. I don't have his lifetime PPs in front of me, but it was a good, solid effort. The pace was not crazy fast, but it was fast. Some of our fractions are highlighted in red, but he was right up close to it. So I'm not sure that the pace wasn't a little bit outweighed by the course they ran over, because the top two were both up fairly close. Tusk, I personally would have had a hard time coming up with him. About the only thing I could say is Saffie Joseph has just been absolutely on fire. So if you were willing to take him at blind faith that he would have this horse ready to fire a big one, you had a nice price on Tusk.
Yeah, I know he had a little bit of trouble in that Claiming Crown race in his prior start. I thought some people might have made a little bit too much of that, but in retrospect, maybe not, because he ran so much better in this race. I mean, as for Saffie Joseph's performance recently, I looked up some of the numbers, because one of the things that I love about the new DRF formulator now is that you can go in and really specify a specific amount of time to look at a trainer's record. And just over the past 2 weeks, Saffie Joseph has went 10 for 23, winning at almost 50% with an ROI of about $3.50. So these horses are just winning at a high rate right now. We'll see if he can keep that up, because that's a really hard win rate to maintain over a longer period of time. But the horses are definitely running for him right now. As for the others, I thought Guido ran pretty well to be second with kind of an odd trip. I thought John Velasquez put him in sort of an uncomfortable spot early, kind of rating in second place, about a half length behind the leader while on the inside, which I just never like to see. But I know there's always the concern that Guido is just going to run off with his riders. So I think they were trying to prevent him from doing that. I mean, all in all, it probably worked out for him, because Guido ran one of his best races in a long time.
Yeah, he did. It was odd. I'm not sure what to do with a horse like Guido, because if you let him run, he usually winds up getting in a duel or just going too fast. Given the result, I guess maybe they're just trying to teach him something. And I would say it worked, because as you say, it's his best result in quite a while. I'm not going to argue with it. I'm like you. I don't like that trip of being behind when you're on the inside, just a little bit behind the leader. But he seemed to handle it okay. He didn't seem all that happy with it. But like you said, he ran a good second. So maybe they're on to something, and maybe he can mature a little bit and not be so need the lead type.
The other graded stakes that they ran this past weekend at Gulfstream was the TimeforMUS River, 2 races earlier on Saturday's card. We talked about it going in. It wasn't the strongest group of grade 3 fillies and mares that have been assembled, but the winner looks like one that does have potential to be better in the future. That's Magic Star, who was making just her 3rd career start here for Chad Brown. It was an ambitious placement by Chad Brown because typically he's not one to skip a condition with these horses, and she only had a maiden win to her name coming into this race, but she definitely took a big step forward to get the job done here. I know this is a horse that they've always liked a lot, and seems like she's finally delivering on that potential.
Yeah, she got a 115 TimeformUS speed figure, which is certainly nearing that really good graded stakes potential. She looked good doing it. She came from, fairly far back in the field. She wasn't a whole lot of lengths behind, but it wasn't a super fast pace or anything. And I think she was just the best in here. She's one of those that, this was one of those races that looked weak on paper. So why not take a shot? These are kind of usually ripe for people stepping up in class. As we talked about on the forecast, she didn't go off near that 9-2 morning line. She was bet down to 5-2. So I don't think there was a lot of value in taking that risk, but she sure looked good doing it. And I imagine we'll see another jump up in class next time. And depending who's in, she could be an interesting filly.
Yeah, people like you and I are never going to bet a horse like this at 5-2. It's just more often than not, these horses don't take that step forward off their slower speed figures. But when you've got Chad Brown in your corner, I guess that can give you a little bit of extra confidence. This is a horse that I remember there was a lot of buzz about her last summer at Saratoga. I think she was trading in company with Dunbar Road and working heads up with that filly. And there was talk about her being one of Chad Brown's best 3-year-olds, and just took her a while to get to the races, but she's definitely attaining that level now. So it'll be interesting to see if she continue running faster against some tougher company in the future. I'm going to throw you just a bit of a curveball, Craig. I know we didn't put this race on the rundown, but I kind of was reminded of it as I was going through the charts for Saturday. We did see last year's 4th place finisher from the Travers endorsed come back and win an allowance race right in between these 2 stakes at Gulfstream. The 9th race on the card didn't get the biggest speed figure in the world. He got a 115, but just watching the race visually, I thought he looked okay doing it.
Yeah, he looked fine. It didn't quite jump out enough at me that I thought it was one. We had enough other things to talk about, but it was a good effort. He had run some good races last year. He was a solid figures. He didn't quite get back to that level we saw. I think he had hit the 120 mark once or twice last year, but it was a good return race, and I would imagine he can build on this. And given the state of the older horse division right now, I mean, you can look at the field that's taken shape for the Pegasus. It's not exactly one that's going to knock your socks off. So I see no reason this horse couldn't wind up being a player in the older horse division.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I was just mentioning it because of what you said about the older horse division. There's not a whole lot of depth out there, so you want to see some of these horses able to step up and join that group of runners in that graded stakes division, because we haven't seen too many outstanding performances yet. Let's move on to those maiden races. There was one in particular from Saturday, a 1 mile race that went as the 6th on the card, won by Cara Caro, who was making his 2nd start for Gustavo Delgado. This horse took a big step forward. The pace was legitimate. He stalked it, just opened up on the turn and continued to widen in the stretch and earned a pretty nice speed figure for a maiden breaker in a rout.
Yeah, he got that 106. Now, it is, of course, the 1-turn mile at Gulfstream. I personally kind of consider them between, a true route and a sprint race, but it was a logical next step. He was favored off his debut where he got a 95 when he was the runner-up. And, there's just no knocks on the race. It was pretty fast. It is fast for a maiden race. He did lose first time out to what looks like a pretty good horse in Premier Star for Jorge Navarro. And, I'll be interested to see where this one shows up, if they take their time with him or if they rush him in the stakes races. Personally, it looked like one to me who maybe needs another try in an allowance or maybe just a listed stake before tackling the big guys.
Yeah, it seemed like there was some quality in this field. I mean, the runner-up Spa City was one that I know was well meant 2nd time out as well. He had shown some promise in his debut, and he beat that horse by 6 lengths. So it's always a positive sign when you see those large margins between the horses at the finish to go along with those impressive speed figures, suggesting there is legitimacy to that number. So it'll be interesting to see what this horse does in the future. But it definitely looked good in this race. There were a couple of other maiden winners on Saturday that didn't achieve the same high speed figures that Caracaro got. On Sunday, though, we did see some faster maiden breakers. Motivated Seller won a 6 furlong race, got a 100 TimeformUS speed figure. Although this is one that was really bumped off the final time figure because she set an extremely fast pace to get the job done.
Yeah, she did. She's a filly who, like you said, did get 100 for the effort, but there was, I think it was 12 points of bump up. My buddy here, Mason, my dog, is deciding to talk, so I hope he's not bugging people too much. But yeah, all the fractions are coded in red. Was basically a speed duel. I mean, a 135 opening quarter mile on our pace figure scale while dueling with Senora Roma, who held on to be second. These two were just much the best, as no one else could even close into these hot fractions. So the one thing I'd say, normally when I see horses like this, it tells me more than likely Motivated Seller is going to be a sprinter. These kind don't often stretch out well, but with Chad Brown, you never know. I mean, if he gives her a shot at it, I might give it a second look, but definitely a solid debut.
Yeah, we don't often see speed duels like this anymore. It seems like there were just two really well-meant firsters in this field, and the instructions from both trainers were probably get out of the gate from the inside and try to establish position, and they both rode the same way and just got into one of those duels you don't often see. And they finished 1-2, but Motivated Seller was definitely superior in this spot. Later on in the card, we saw another first-time starter win by a large margin. That was Spice is Nice for Todd Pletcher, this time going a mile. She is also a 2-year-old filly. This one's got a huge pedigree, though. She's by Curlin. The Damn Dame Dorothy was a Grade 1 winner, I believe, winning a Grade 1 in the Humana Distaff, going 7 furlongs. But I loved what I saw from this horse. She was just really professional, rating early, coming through, and winning just as easy as you want in the stretch.
Yeah, that was impressive. It actually looked like she was going to get challenged turning for home. I forget who the filly was, and she just ran off like that was a harness horse or something with a cart behind her. It was as impressive as can be. I found it interesting that Todd Pletcher debuted her at a mile. He didn't bother sprinting her or anything, and she backed it up. I mean, she's bred to run all day, as you mentioned. She's got pedigree for days, and I mean, just a really nice effort. I probably couldn't say enough good about it. She got a 107 TimeformUS speed figure, which is right up there with the best in the division that we've seen in races like the Breeders' Cup and early 3-year-old races. So at this point, you just have to say the sky's the limit for her.
Yeah, that 3-year-old filly division, while British Idiom is a deserving champion, she didn't run that fast last year, and I feel like we're waiting for somebody to really establish themselves and run some speed figures that we feel like are Grade 1 quality. And while Spice is Nice hasn't quite done it yet, she feels like she could be a potential star in this division. It's got to step forward more, but this was definitely the way you want to see a horse start their career.
Right. And I will note that her final time figure was a 110, so even a little quicker. It just got knocked back a little bit because the pace was on the slow side. Some of our fractions are coded in blue, but she came from off the pace, so I'm not going to knock her too much. If you ask me which number works better for her, I'd probably say the 110.
Yeah, that's definitely a nice number for a horse making its debut. Let's move on to Santa Anita. They ran the La Cañada Grade 3 event on Saturday for the fillies and mares, going a mile and 16th on the dirt. And not the strongest field in the world. We had the Calbred, Queen Bee to You, getting the job done here, winning, I believe, her second graded stakes in a row. And for me, that just kind of speaks to the quality of this division out in California right now. It's not a whole lot of depth to it. And Queen Bee to You is an admirable kind of horse, but when the going gets a little tougher, I don't see her continuing to win graded stakes races.
No, she only got a 105 TimeformUS speed figure, which is way below par. She also even got a bit of a gift, if you ask me, from Drayden Van Dyke. I'm not sure why he gave up his inside position and on Derlou, who was setting a reasonable slow pace, and it probably wound up costing him in the race. You never know. I mean, maybe Queen Bee to You is just better. She came in faster on speed figures, so maybe she beats her anyway if she has to go around her. But as you say, not a whole lot to talk about. When you can't even hit 110 in a graded stakes for older horses, it's probably not the strongest field.
Yeah, and the favorite, or the horse that was going to be the favorite in this race, Spice Perfection, scratched out. So that made the race even easier for these horses. So I agree. I just don't have a whole lot to say about this one. Earlier in the card, though, we saw a performance that caught a lot of people's eyes. That was Jolie Olympica winning the Las Ciennegas, the Grade 3 event, going 5.5 furlongs on the turf. This is an undefeated horse, making her first start in the U.S. She began her career in Brazil, racing on the turf. This was also the shortest distance that she had ever tried in her career. And boy, she looked good doing it. Mike Smith rode her with a ton of confidence.
He did. I mean, she looked professional every step of the way, never looked like a loser. She ran a 113 Timeform US speed figure, which is decent. As you say, I'm not going to judge her too much on that because I don't really think this will wind up being her best distance sprinting at Santa Anita, but probably wants to go a bit longer. She's won at a mile already. It is Dick Mandela. I'm sure he has designs on stretching her out further. It wasn't the strongest field. I was happy there was at least one other 5.5 furlong sprint on the day, which isn't always the case. So it made making the speed figure a little bit easier than we usually see. So we'll see where she goes. She certainly looked good, no knocks whatsoever, and curious what the next step will be because she certainly is a filly with some talent.
Yeah, this was a track record performance. I know neither of us make a whole lot out of that because that's totally dependent on how fast the turf course is playing. It was obviously pretty quick on Saturday. But I agree. I liked the way that she did it. She was opening up at the end. It seemed like she was really hitting her best stride in that last 16th of a mile. I watched her most recent race from Brazil when she won going the 1 mile distance, and she seemed to be finishing up that race with just as much vigor as she had in this 5.5 furlong race. So I do think the stretch out is eventually going to be what she wants. And if she can improve off this performance, she's going to be a player in really wherever they put her because this was a pretty promising U.S. debut.
Yeah, as for the track record also, I mean, this is a fairly new distance. If they've run it 50 times, I'd be surprised. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, not something you want to make a big deal out of. On Sunday, we saw Mother, the 3-year-old filly, win the Kalukan Queen, a minor stakes out in California. She was coming off, I believe, a third-place finish behind Hard Not to Love in the La Brea. That was a race that got an extremely fast Timeform US speed figure. I guess Mother regressed a little bit in this spot, but she won this race pretty easily. They changed up the tactics, took the blinkers off, rode her from off the pace this time, and she won relatively comfortably in the end.
Yeah, she's going to get about a 115 Timeform US speed figure, I would guess, which is a regression of 10 points. Kind of interesting going in. I'm probably the last guy to be a bounce theory guy, but Mother was a horse who, I mean, I'm a guy who's read every handicapping book there was. And I remember the original bounce theory thing I read was horse coming off a layoff, tough race first time back. Comes back fairly quickly, which she definitely did, especially by today's standards. So in my head, I was thinking if ever there's a bounce candidate, Mother is it. But the thing was, when you looked at the field, who was going to beat her? There probably wasn't going to be anyone. And so I think she probably did regress a little bit. She probably wasn't quite as good as she was last time out, but against his field, it was good enough. And I'm wondering what they're going to do with her because she seems to be a better filly this year than she was last year.
I also think it comes down to just the nature of Timeform US speed figures and the way that they rode this horse. When you ride a sprinter coming from off the pace, they're just naturally going to get a slightly slower Timeform US speed figure than a horse that is in the teeth of a really fast pace, which is what was the case with Mother in the La Brea. She was dueling with Bellafina early. And I think the fact that she ran well and won this race so easily, it does flatter the performance of Bellafina, who I think everybody acknowledges probably ran the best race in the La Brea given her trip. So the fact that Mother came from off the pace and got a slightly slower speed figure here, I wouldn't make too much of it. How good is she overall? I think it remains to be seen because she's got to really achieve one of these victories against tougher company. But I thought she won this race the right way.
Yeah, and that's my thing. From a speed figure perspective, she's just a better filly. She looks like she's matured. She's putting things together. So it wouldn't surprise me if she winds up to be a graded stakes winner going forward.
Let's move on to New York and Aqueduct, where on Saturday they ran the St. Florida Sandy Stakes for the New York breds. We're going to talk about a couple of New York bred stakes at Aqueduct from this past weekend. This one was for the older horses, going 7 furlongs. And this is one we talked about on the forecast last week. We both had the exact same opinion. And this is one where our agreement turned out to be a good sign because Arthur's Hope was able to get to the front end and just dominate this race on the lead the entire way.
Yeah, it is. We actually got one right and one we agreed even. What I found interesting about this race, first I'll say he did get a 119 TimeformUS speed figure. All the fractions are coded in blue. So it did go out as expected. But what I found interesting was basically every person I heard handicap this race. Andy Serling, yourself. I heard Nick Tamaro on Steve Bick's show. And every single person I heard picked Arthur's Hope, and yet the horse still went off 5-1. So I think it just goes to show you people are going to bet at the window their own opinions. They like listening to what you have to say, but in this case, the caretaker being the favorite was a bit baffling to me. I know he had been running well for Rudy Rodriguez, but he was basically the slowest horse in the race with a bad pace setup. So every now and then you just get a good spot where you can take advantage of some mistakes the public makes, and I think this was one of them. I am curious on your take on the track. We have it coded in pink as somewhat speed favoring, definitely more than your average neutral day. And I kind of agree with it. I don't think it was a track that was dictating results, but I do think it helped to have some speed.
Yeah, I was definitely happy to get that 5-1 on Arthur's Hope. I think I made him 5-1 on the line and was kind of worried he was going to get bet down off that. But I think it's hard for a lot of handicappers to make excuses for multiple performances for a horse. They can make an excuse for a last race, but I think a lot of handicappers do want to see, the obvious winning form that a horse has. And Arthur's Hope's form, admittedly, was a little bit buried, but if you dug for it, it was definitely there because he had run some really high TimeformUS speed figures in the past. As for the track, I agree with the characterization that light pink rating that you see in the TimeformUS charts. I do think it was a little bit speed favoring. Do I think it was the kind of track that was significantly exaggerating winning performances where I would not respect the speed figures that these front runners earned? No, I think it was a track that was maybe bumping up performances of speed horses by, 5 speed figure points or something like that. Maybe it made a slight difference in this race, although I think Arthur's Hope was probably winning anyway, given the pace advantage that he had. Yeah, I don't think it exaggerated performances that much, but I do think that you were better off being forwardly placed on Saturday at Aqueduct. And I love the way that Kendrick Carmouche rode this horse because he really came out of the gate under a drive, riding for position, and then he was able to back down the pace after he established the lead. And I hate when riders on speed horses come out of the gate tentatively and just are waiting for the horse to take them there. I mean, Kendrick knew what he wanted to do with this horse, and he established that position right out of the gate.
Yeah, and I thought Dylan Davis gave a good ride as well because that's a horse that doesn't often show the kind of speed that he did. Not that he, the pace was slow, but he didn't drop back in the field like he has at some points in the past. And he really made Arthur's Hope earn it, and he turning for home, I was a little worried he was going to beat him. So I think the top two both ran very well. It was definitely a bit of a merry-go-round as the top three ran 1, 2, 3 all the way around the track. So maybe you might want to give some excuses to some behind with reason. I mean, the pace wasn't with them. The track wasn't with them. So, going out of this race, I might look forward to betting on some of the others that didn't hit the top three. The one thing I will say is I just love these New York bred sprinters. We know they're going to be around. They run against each other all the time. They're a handicapper's dream. You can really have fun playing these races.
Yeah, they remind me of that same group that they have in Maryland, that Lewis Field and Lockheed. And these old hard-knocking sprinters are fun because they take turns beating each other. They run some fast races, and we definitely have a pretty good crew racing right now. On Sunday, we saw another New York bred stakes race, this one for the newly turned 3-year-olds, and a little bit of an upset as Silly K really took it to the favorite Dream Bigger early. Didn't seem like he'd be the one pressing that horse, but Jose Lezcano, this horse took him there early. The horse broke well, and he just went with it, and Silly Key overtook that horse, and in the end ended up winning pretty easily and handing Linda Rice her 2000th career victory.
Yeah, quite the accomplishment for her, and a very good race by Silly Key. That was a good pick by you. I know we didn't talk about this race on the forecast, but I think I retweeted yours that he was your pick that day. And I think this race was a really good example of you have to be careful with these lightly raced horses. Dream Bigger came out. He's been fast from the outset, but he really hasn't shown any improvement. He'd basically been running the same speed figure over and over, whereas Silly Key had, improved each time out, and he did so more. So, sometimes you can take advantage of these horses that get over bet, particularly lightly raced horses like Silly Key. And a horse like Dream Bigger, at some point, they're just not going to move on. He came out, he was the big bully, kind of beat up on New York breds a couple times in stake races, but, he just didn't improve. So it's just a good handicapping lesson. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and Silly Key, his improvement here, it also speaks to how important it is to pay attention to track biases, because I know something that I had harped on quite a lot a couple months ago was in the middle of November at Aqueduct, there was a really strong speed bias that seemed to be rooted in the fact that horses were not handling the kickback situation well. There was a bit of a cold spell in New York, and I know they couldn't maintain the track the way they normally do. And it just seemed like horses that were trying to close through the kickback were having a ton of trouble. And one of the only horses that made a significant closing move in one of those races was Silly Key, who ran through the kickback and finished a very good second to Dream Bigger in his prior start. And it wasn't a big surprise to me that he was able to turn the tables, because I think there was an argument that he might have run the better race last time. Dream Bigger definitely took a step backwards here, but I think what you said really rings true. A lot of times these precocious horses, they don't continue to go on, and those that are progressing towards the end of the year when they start to turn 3-year-olds, they just surpass them in development. And speaking of Linda Rice, that's just her MO. She doesn't always have them ready to go first time out, but they tend to do better with racing, and that was definitely the case with Silly Key. On Saturday at Aqueduct, one more race to talk about for the newly turned 3-year-olds. There was a maiden event going a mile, and I think the winner of this race is one that you want to take note of. War Stopper for Rudy Rodriguez was making his 4th career start here, but it was just his 2nd race on the dirt, and he took a gigantic step forward, showed early speed that we had never seen from him before, just opened up on the turn. A first-time starter, Continuation, did take a good run at him late, but this horse just never stopped, and both of these top 2 finishers earned some really nice speed figures for a maiden race.
They did, and it was quite a gap back to the others. The winner got a 111. The runner-up got a 107. We do have the pace actually highlighted in blue. War Stopper had a 115 final time figure, knocked down a little bit. I'm not really sure what to make of this race. It was a very tough speed figure to make, I'll be honest. Well, at first anyway. It was a bit head-scratching when I was looking at the results, but as I started sorting the races by distance, everything kind of fell into place where basically you couldn't rate the shorter distance races with the mile races, and I think it was even the 7 furlongs. But as I looked through the charts this morning, I'm really happy with what they came up with. What I'm curious to ask you, is there anything in that last race you saw that could have indicated, tipped off that this race was coming from War Stopper?
Yes and no. I mean, I did like War Stopper in this race. Did I think he was going to run a 111 Timeform speed figure? Certainly not. But I did think War Stopper was coming out of a very strong maiden race on Cigar Mile Day. We also saw that Mark Hennig horse Kingmeister come out of the same race to win it at Gulfstream on Saturday. So I think that race that was won by cost basis on Cigar Mile Day was a strong maiden event. And also, that was a day that I think you didn't want to be coming from way off the pace, that Cigar Mile Day at Aqueduct. And War Stopper just didn't show any early speed that day. I think they actually took him back to last in the early going, and he passed about half the field to be 5th there. They added blinkers for the first time in this race, and that definitely injected a lot of speed into him. But did I expect this kind of performance? Certainly not. He is a horse that has a distinct dirt pedigree. So it was a little perplexing to me that they started him on turf twice, because he really is bred for the dirt. And obviously that's his preferred surface. The other horse coming out of this race, to me, that's equally as exciting is the first-time starter Continuation, who came in for Dane Kabisky, who hasn't really started many horses in New York at all over the past couple of years. But obviously this one was well meant shipping into New York. And I think they just were a little unfortunate to run into another horse like War Stopper, because if War Stopper wasn't in the race, Continuation would have won his maiden by 15 or 20 lengths, and he'd be the talk of the town.
Yeah, no doubt. I do want to bring up that cost basis races. Not only as the Kingmeister and War Stopper won next out, the horse who finished behind War Stopper, Liam's Fire, actually went to Laurel next time out and won a maiden special weight race. So definitely a race that's shaping up really strong. That was a day we had coded in bright red as speed favoring. So maybe we have some horses that are stepping up on more favorable tracks than what they ran that day. But certainly a race to keep an eye on, because there's still several out of there who haven't run back yet.
Sticking with those maiden and allowance races, let's close out the show by going to the fairgrounds to talk about a couple of 3-year-old allowance performances from down there. Let's begin with one from Saturday. This was, I believe it was an allowance race for the Louisiana breds, going 6 furlongs. That was won by second-time starter No Parole. This was a horse whose debut we had talked about on the Pacecast a couple of weeks ago. He also won against Louisiana breds first time out. And this allowance score was just basically a carbon copy of his debut performance. Set a legitimate pace this time, but once they got into the stretch, he just opened up and won by a double-digit margin.
He did. He had run a 104 TimeformUS first time out. He ran a 105 this time. My assistant does the fairgrounds, but we had a good discussion about this last night. I actually thought it was going to come back a bit higher, maybe in the 110 or so range. But, he laid out his case. It was a changing track, a wet track throughout the day. And when I looked at the races after, he sold me. So we went with a 105. What I'll say about No Parole is we still don't know. We know he has talent, but he's basically beating Louisiana breds as a guy who's made a lot of figures over the years. You're not going to get the strongest competition in these Louisiana bred races. So at this point, I will say we just know, and I just don't know. I'm curious to see where he'll show up. Maybe he'll start showing up on some of the bigger races. He's obviously not in the LeCompte this upcoming weekend, but maybe a race like the Risen Star if they try to stretch him out. If they go that route, he's a horse I would definitely be against because he's not running particularly fast no matter how good he looks. So if you think that he can, you're definitely going to take the worst of it at the window.
Yeah, and people just generally are sort of mesmerized by ones in a horse's PPs, especially when those ones are next to these double-digit victories, margins of victory, I should say. So No Parole just has overbet written all over him wherever he shows up next time out. He has looked really good. Just watching his races from a visual standpoint, he's like this big tank of a horse that just, not only does he tower over his opposition in ability, but he just towers over them in physical stature as well. So he looks like one that has the physical tools to go on. But as you were saying, he's going to have to run faster in his future starts. And we'll see where that comes if they do stretch him out in the future. But definitely an exciting start to his career. On Sunday at Fairgrounds, we saw a open allowance race going the 2 turns. I think this one was 1 mile and 70 yards as Mailman Money came off a maiden victory at Churchill Downs to get the job done here. I will note this was an off the turf race. It was dominated by runners that were entered main track only, but this was not the strongest allowance race because it did have some turf horses in there. But Mailman Money showed a nice turn of foot at the top of the stretch to kick away from this field and won in good fashion.
He did, and I would guess I don't have the official figure for this one yet because it was run Sunday, but he's going to get around a 104, 105, about the same as No Parole did. But I think visually it was the more impressive race. He showed he was able to rate a bit. He was somewhat wide on both turns. I think the chart comments are a bit exaggerated. They had him 4 to 5 wide and then 3 to 4 or something like that. And I think it was probably at least a path exaggerated. But in any case, he didn't do it the easy way. He definitely lost some ground. They don't have trackus at the fairgrounds that I'm aware of, but it was certainly 3 or 4 lengths, I'd say, in total. And it didn't seem to matter. He pulled away. He wasn't even the favorite in this race, which tells you there were some others. Dallas Stewart had the runner-up. Winning Impression, who was coming off a nice win with a 99 TimeformUS speed figure. So all in all, I was pretty impressed with Mailman Money.
Yeah, and he's, I believe, going out for the same connections as Mr. Money, who also was a son of Golden Sense for these same connections. So some ties there. He's a cool-looking horse. If you watch the race, he's got this big white blaze. People that are fans of interesting markings on horses are going to be a fan of this horse. But like with No Parole, he's going to have to run faster in the future to compete against some of the graded stakes company that we're going to see in the Derby preps. But he's obviously started his career the right way.
Yep, no doubt.
That's all the racing for this week. We'll be back on Friday to do the TimeformUS forecast, and we'll continue to talk about a lot of these 3-year-olds because we have one of the first Derby preps offering points towards the Kentucky Derby, the LeCompte, being run on Saturday, in addition to some other stakes from the fairgrounds that are being run this weekend. So we'll look at those races and talk about some of them on the TimeformUS forecast on Friday. For now, though, remember you can always listen to us on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcasts, just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form and make sure to check us out on Tuesdays and Fridays. So thanks for listening today, and we'll be back again on Friday to handicap some races for the weekend.